Hi, welcome, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to give some of the other attendees a bit of a few minutes to join. In the meantime, make sure you get yourself some water, get some snacks so that you can properly enjoy the next session, which we are going to start very shortly. I see that we've got a number of people, well-known people, joining us. It's good to have you here. Thank you. Hopefully, the information that we're going to share with you today is valuable to you and that you learn a lot. For now, officially, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for being here today. As you know, this is a live webcast on our efforts to share with you information about Sippy 2020 and some of the changes that we've made to the feature set. Some of the features that we've talked about in some of the videos that we've posted are going to be very beneficial to users and customers of our Softswitch, and we are hoping that the information that we're sharing with you is going to be a valuable way for you to begin to understand what those features are about. Today, I've got with me Philip Ma, who is our product manager, and Pavel Bustle, who is in charge of quality. He's our lead Q&A. So to start off, today we are going to be going over some of the information relating to the OpenSIPS migration. This is something that's been coming for us for a while, and Philip and Pavel are going to share some of the critical information with you that lets you know essentially why we've decided to take this turn now and move over to OpenSIPS. In addition to that, we're going to have a short question and answer period around OpenSIPS and the OpenSIPS migration. Shortly after that, we'll begin to go over some of the features that are coming up in Sippy 2020, just as an overview, so that any of you who have not watched the videos that we've been posting can have a sense of what is actually coming up in Sippy 2020. For now, my name is Fred. I'm in charge of marketing and sales, and I really do hope that you get a lot of valuable information out of today's session. I'll leave you with Philip and Pavel. I believe Pavel will be first. Go ahead. Or sorry, go ahead, Philip.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll talk about a couple of things, as Fred had mentioned. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. Fred will pose those questions after we talk about the OpenSIPS stuff, and at the tail end when we get to the features of Sippy 2020. But first, let's give you guys a bit of a history lesson about signaling. There was a package called SIR that was the first project that used SIP for signaling. And several years ago, this package was, or project was forked into separate packages that handled signaling. And out of that forking, we chose to utilize OpenSIPS to replace SIR. OpenSIPS is actively worked on today. It has a very vibrant community full of open source enthusiasts and a well-rounded community. And it offers a number of new features and modules that are really useful for our future development. We'll talk about some of the cool things that we will be able to implement with this migration a little bit later during this discussion as well. So what really changed is something that you guys might be asking. Well, this goes back to our Sippy 5.2 version. And in our Sippy 5.2 version, we added OpenSIPS to our release package. Now, not all our customers were initially migrated off from SIR to OpenSIPS at this time. What actually happened was if you were buying a new switch from us, or if a new environment was created for your Softswitch, those people would be set up to utilize OpenSIPS to start off with. This really gave us an opportunity to look at how we implemented OpenSIPS, keep track of any problems that might come up from the signaling without disrupting our existing customer base. So instead of using our existing customers as guinea pigs for this, we kind of got a chance to see how OpenSIPS worked with new deployments and troubleshoot any problems that did come up. Thankfully, they're all worked out now. Things have been moving pretty slowly through the life cycle of Sippy 5.2, which was released sometime last year. When it comes to our upcoming release, Sippy 2020, we've decided to make this OpenSIPS migration a prerequisite to get you up to Sippy 2020. This means that before you get to your upgrade of Sippy 2020, we'll be running through a quick check of your system to make sure that you have the right operating system, the right Postgres versions, whether or not there's a couple of other checks that are in there. One of these checks is going to be for the OpenSIPS signaling package. And if we do find that you are still running SIR, we'll probably schedule out a maintenance window to have you switched over to OpenSIPS. This will sort of ease that disruption level if there are any problems. Not that we're expecting any, but it's probably the smoothest way we can move you forward to our next version. And as I mentioned, this change is really important for us because SIR is not really actively worked on, and new features just aren't available in the newer versions of the signaling packages. And as I mentioned, this transition really starting in 5.2 really gave us a chance to look at any problems that might have come up through this migration process. So we have a good understanding now that we've seen it in production systems of what performance looks like and how the system works. So this transition we fully expect is going to have minimal impact to our existing customer base. Finally, transitioning everyone to OpenSIPS gives us a lot more flexibility when it comes to offering new features in the future. And just to give you an idea, this is not an exhaustive list of things that we have on the go that'll come in terms of features that will come after 2020. But these are definitely some things that we have on our roadmap that we have started already taking a closer look at as we build out to our not just Sippy 2020, but beyond. So one of the cool things that we have coming is better support for TLS and TCP transports. These sort of relate to some of the security when it comes to signaling. Some of the new features that are coming out is SMPP support. You could read that as SMS messaging. That's going to be a fairly major feature that we'll be introducing in future versions, as well as it allows us some tools to address some regulatory concerns in around stir and shaken. These are new regulatory considerations that are being adopted by markets like the US and in other markets as well. So without this migration to OpenSIPS, we wouldn't be able to work on some of these really cool features that many of you guys have been asking us about. So this sort of step is a good stepping point to move on to some really big, important features for Sippy in the long roadmap that we have for our product. I also wanted to sort of point out our active involvement in the OpenSIPS project. Sippy Software has been active in the community since its very inception. We have our CEO who's handling some of the production today, who's been active in the community. He's been presenting at OpenSIPS summits in the past few years and have talked about a number of different projects and topics in around OpenSIPs and the telecoms industry as a whole. Some of the topics that he's covered in past presentations include discussions on RTP proxy, B2BUA, and the use of OpenSIPs in terms of IoT and how SIP might be handled through in IoT spheres. Many of these presentations are up on YouTube, so if you just Google around, you should find them. This is a good time for any questions if you guys have any. So got our eye on the chat here.
So yeah, as Philip said, go ahead and feel free to ask your questions. I see that we've got a number of folks from pretty much all over the world, really. Claude from Maryland is here. We've got Sank from Turkey. Oleg is here as well. So if you guys do have some questions for Philip or for Pavel on the quality or testing side, please feel free to ask.
And Claude, just to let you know, you're probably going to be one of the first ones that we migrate over to OpenSIPs, just so you know. I don't know off the top of my head if we've already done that for your environment specifically, but most of our hosted customers will probably be the first ones to get this migration.
Okay, so we'll give you guys like a minute or so to come up with a question, and if not, then we'll move on to getting some information from Pavel. I think somebody's coming up with a question. Okay, so Ryrie has a question, and his question is, do we have any plans to support MS Teams?
That's definitely something on the radar as well. I think this transition to OpenSIPs definitely does assist with that. The MS Teams functionality, I think, requires us to make sure that we have TLS implemented for our signaling and SRTP. Certainly, this migration to OpenSIPs will help us out in terms of getting to be able to support MS Teams in the future. So this is sort of the first step that we need to look at, and then from there we could start looking at implementing TLS for signaling in a future version, and then from there we'll be a little bit better positioned to support MS Teams.
Okay, thanks, Philip. Great question. Oleg has a question as well on migration. So his question is, how is the migration from 5.2 to OpenSIPs going to, what is it going to look like? So is it something that the question is essentially that they're going to go from 5.2 to OpenSIPs and then on to Sippy 2020?
Yeah, so the first step will be a sort of like a requirements check that will be run through our support team. We'll have a script that's prepared for our support team to run through. It'll check things like operating system version, Postgres version, this OpenSIPs. So you will, if you happen to be running SIR at this time, for example, we'll be able to identify that. And let you know that an upgrade to OpenSIPs will have to take place before you do your upgrade to Sippy 2020. And then once you're transitioned to OpenSIPs, they might run through the script once again just to be make sure that everything's in order. And then at that point, you'll be upgraded to a Sippy 2020. So this would be a separate maintenance. There'd be a separate maintenance window to do that migration from SIR to OpenSIPs. Okay,
thank you, Philip. Good question. I've got another one here from Helia Office. The question is, do we have a publicized or a published roadmap? That's a question that the sales team would also have.
No, we don't actually publish our roadmap. In terms of how we select our features to implement, we do have an internal roadmap that we keep in mind, and in amongst working on bug fixes that might come up or implementation of new features. Those are sort of kept pretty close to our heart, and particularly in around new features. But certainly, when it comes to what you're going to see in 2020, we'll sort of cover that during the scope of the second part of this discussion as well. It'll cover some of the new features that we're planning to introduce with our next version. And then there's a few more sort of further off projects like SIP TLS, like SMPP support, and like Stir Shaken, where we have some idea that these are important features for us to be looking at.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Senk has a further question on 5.2. He's got a production system on 5.2 already, and he wants to know if OpenSIPS is already part of it.
I don't know that off the top of my head, Senk. That's a sort of a configuration setting that's set up on your Softswitch. I don't inherently know that off the top of my head, but I do know Arthur's in the chat who might know.
Okay. I think that.
I'm not sure if I'm coming through, but we also planned actually to add a page on the system status where you can actually check easily to see if the system is already configured to run OpenSIPS. And it also per environment setting. So essentially, if you're running like a busy system, we will give you opportunity to convert those environments one by one, not in bulk.
Okay. Thank you, Max. For those of you who are not aware, that is our fearless leader, CEO, and all-around good guy, Max. So if you heard it from him, you can take that to the bank. So if anyone has any more questions, I guess we can go on to the next part of our session. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we did is have a lot of information around the new features that are coming up in Sippy 2020. We know that Sippy 2020 is going to solve a lot of problems for a lot of people, and it's going to increase the value of your Softswitch. So we've done a lot to make sure that the features that go into Sippy 2020 are very well tested, and that they are essentially tried and true. And for that, we use the very good services of our fellow joining us today, who is Pavel. He, as I said, is our lead QA. Pavel, from the quality and the testing perspective, can you tell us a little bit about some of the features that we've gone into detail in previous videos?
Okay, Fred. So basically, the first feature I wanted to a little bit uncover here is our new balance allocation algorithm. To be more particular, this allocation algorithm allows you to utilize account balance more efficiently. So we, for some period of time, had some issues with accounts going negative balance, like their balance was going below zero. And with this allocation algorithm, the remaining funds or minutes would be exhausted and would be basically utilized, as I said, more efficiently. So we will provide two algorithms for different sorts of business. One of them, I suppose, would be commonly used by wholesale, and another one for retail. So for average call duration, this is, on my opinion, the most commonly used practice algorithms that would be configured from your site on system parameters. And in this case, system would do the balance reservation based on average call duration you set up on tariff. So the balance would be reserved with same intervals, like if you said there are 30 seconds, we will try to reserve 30 seconds and then try to reserve another 30 seconds once this time is over. So that being said, this really minimizes the chances for account to go below 0. Right?
Thank you, Pavel. Go ahead, Philip.
The next feature we'll talk about that we're introducing in Sippy 2020 is an extended authentication manager. This new change here splits off functionality, which would normally all be processed through a component we call B2B UA. For this component, authentication is split off from the B2B UA, which also sort of improves the longevity of your hardware. It reduces the call processing time of your calls, which also inherently increases the scalability of your system. So this feature is pretty important for our high CPS customers, and it'll squeeze out a little bit more performance out of your existing system, leaving you a little bit more time on the hardware that you have provisioned for your system. Pavel, do you want to talk about the next feature here?
Sure. So the next feature that is on the slide is reliable provisional responses that is described properly in RFC 3262. So this standard is widely known as provisional response acknowledge, like PRAC. So starting from Sippy 2020, we will offer support for this particular RFC. And what is the most major change here is that we allow switch operator to acknowledge both origination and termination side for provisional responses. Like this basically makes the situation when some provisional responses has gotten lost because it's UDP and it was lost because of some network failure, has never reached the switch. This minimizes such situation since when this particular setting would be on, we will ensure that all provisional responses are received in particular order.
Yeah, and maybe just a quick comment on this. I see a couple of names here in the chat that have already asked of Prac. Helia, there you go. Has asked, is one of those customers that asked for this feature. So we're really happy to be able to bring this forward to you in our next version. The next feature that we'll talk a bit about today is multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication gives us some new tools to improve the security of your Softswitch. Typically, as it's done in previous versions, we pretty much just relied on a username and password. In the Sippy in the Sippy 2020 generation of our software, we've introduced email verification, which is pretty common in things like e-commerce, as well as Google Authenticator. Both these two new features increase the security of your Softswitch by making sure that your users have access to something before they access your sensitive data on your Softswitch. For you to use this feature, you will need to make sure that your web users have a valid email address. That'll be pretty important. If there's no email, you can't verify an email. So that seems pretty common sense. We really strongly suggest our customers to use Google Authenticator. It really does give you a sense of security for your soft switches. So we just wanted to throw that new feature out there for this new release.
Okay.
I suppose it's again my turn now.
There are some questions.
Yeah, I thought I'd
can answer it.
Yeah, I thought I'd give a quick stop here so that we can answer a couple of the questions that are starting to come up
Philip,
there.
can you roll back to the authentication? Yes, please. Thanks. Continue, Fred.
So I believe it's Helia office. They've asked when we expect to have Sippy 2020 released. That's a very important question, and I think that Philip, please go ahead and give us some details.
For Sippy 2020, we're just wrapping up the final bit of testing of new features. Pavel's got quite a bit on his plate, just wrapping up the testing of this. So we will be we'll be putting our 2020 release out in alpha release over the next couple of weeks. That means that for sandbox use, you'll get a chance to install the 2020 release and just verify that everything's working okay, given your accounts and vendors. So for you to be able to access the alpha release of our Softswitch, you'll need a sandbox license, which sort of goes part and parcel with our sandbox contest. I don't recall, Helia, if you guys currently have a sandbox, but this is definitely something that you might want to think about. Just to vet and double check these settings before we get to that new release. Prac does have a fair bit of came with a fair number of changes. So we do want to make sure that with the introduction of this new feature, everything's working appropriately for you.
So I'll read out a couple of more questions here, just so that we get everybody a chance to ask. This is actually more of a suggestion. Senk is saying that we should include SMS authentication with the SMPP. So Philip, maybe touch on that for a little bit.
Yeah, I think this sort of goes into the whole SMS discussion, sort of that some capabilities that get added as part of integration with OpenSIPS. There are definitely some short-term goals that we have for SMS functionality, and there's some more long-term goals we have for SMS functionality. So these are sort of sub goals as part of the big goal of adding SMS support. SMS authentication is sort of on that shorter, sort of near-term implementation, as opposed to something like a feature like bulk SMS messaging. So I do know SMS authentication is certainly pretty important, but I would also sort of recommend you take a quick look at Google Authenticator. Google Authenticator is pretty cool in that it does rotate through your sort of codes that are approved every 2 minutes or so. So it's a neat feature that's sort of still similar to SMS. It's its own thing though.
Okay, thank you, Philip. The next question here comes from Oleg, and it's actually a question that is very dear to my heart. His question is, what is our upgrade policy? He's asking if it's as usual within support within a valid support contract. And the very quick and short answer to that is yes. One of the great benefits that we offer and that having support offers is that you are automatically entitled to those upgrades that the team, that Philip and the rest of the team come up with and that deliver. So, keep your support contracts up to date. By all means, support to us means not only providing the assistance that you might need should something go wrong, but also being able to deliver on these things, putting these features together that customers like you ask for and that we work on to deliver. So yeah, essentially the process is very simple. You make sure that you pay your support contract, that you're in a version that can be upgraded, that's not deprecated or out of support, and you can get the new upgrades. For now, I guess Philip and Pavel, do you want to go on to the next session, the next section?
Pavel?
Sure. So the next item we are about to do in CP 2020 is deprecation of old protocols H323. So historically, H323 has started almost at the same year as SIP in 1996, if I'm not mistaken. And basically, since they started all together, one of them still developed, is still widely used. It's SIP. And H323 has stopped updating in approximately 2000 09. So that being said, our efforts to keep supporting of AC23 are growing from year to year. So it requires extra efforts to do some builds with binary packages. It basically creates some conflicts for another packages. So that being said, we decided to get it deprecated. For customers who still have some configuration with this, our support team will do a quick check by running some scripts that will print maybe some number of authentication rules or vendor connections that still have this HTTP configured. And you will be kindly asked to get this old configuration cleaned. So even though we are removing this in Sippy 2020, H323 will still be supported in prior releases like Sippy 5.2, 5.1, and so on. Philip?
Yeah, and just to add on to what Pavel mentioned, this is also one of those prerequisite checks that would be run before you upgrade to Sippy 2020, just like the OpenSIPS discussion that we had before. And we've already sort of talked on the migration to OpenSIPS, so I don't know how much we need to sort of continue talking about this, but that pretty much covers everything. Just keep in mind, OpenSIPS gives us opens up some new doors for us to add in some great new features like SMS, like TLS signaling. So we're pretty excited for this 2020 release and what we'll see a little bit in the future. So just to let you guys know, these are not the full list of changes we have planned for our Sippy 2020 release. We'll be publishing out our release notes in the coming days for our alpha release. Once again, those won't be the final set of changes, but they'll give you a good idea of what to expect in our future releases. And we'll have an alpha release of our 2020 available fairly soon. So that'll give you a chance to take an early look at the change set, give you a chance to verify all your vendor connections and traffic out to those that would be receiving it. If you don't have a sandbox already, you'll want to talk to Fred, who would be able to help get you set up with a sandbox license for you to try out. And I guess maybe just before we go to questions, I just wanted to say thanks for everyone who does have a valid support agreement with us. The support agreements are a key way for us to define how we build out our product. They help provide us insights as to what features we need to go with. Many of the people that I see here in today's chat have recommended us to work on features like multi-factor authentication, like a transition to OpenSIPS, and a number of changes that we have. The pack functionality. Without your feedback, we wouldn't be able to develop and create the software package that you guys use to run as a core component to your business. So we wanted to give a quick thanks out to our customers about all their wonderful suggestions here. With that, we could probably have some time for some questions.
Okay, so if you do have a question, by all means, take the opportunity to ask. Both Philip and Pavel are very, very, very bright guys, and they'll gladly answer any question you have within limits, of course.
And no, I don't know when the pandemic is going to end. Just for the record.
Okay, so I guess to round out some of the discussion that we've had thus far, one of the things that we consider very important, and as I'm sure you can see from all the features that are coming up in Sippy 2020, we take the performance of your hardware very much as a priority for building the features that we build. Security is absolutely critical to us. So that's a very large component of the features that we are about to release in Sippy 2020, but as an overall component of the Softswitch. So you know, for the argument of making sure that you've got a valid support agreement, having support allows you to have the upgrades, and having the upgrades provides you access to the additional functionality, security, better server performance, things like that. I think we've got a couple more questions here, so let me just see. Oh, I guess no more questions. People are just saying thank you. So thank you, Helia. Thank you, Claude. Thank you, Oleg, as well as Sank, Arthur, and everyone else that has joined us. As I said, you know, this is something that we consider very important. We're glad that you've joined us. Philip, do you have something to add before I close out the session here?
Maybe 2 points. Sank asked about the SMPP support. Yeah, we are planning, as a feature, we are planning to send out multi-factor authentications through SMS as well. But that is blocked before. We have to have SMPP support before we could do SMS authentication. So one can't precede the other. But that is definitely a feature on our roadmap. And we do have a framework to handle multi-factor authentications now. So that should be pretty straightforward once we get that SMPP module going.
Okay.
And then Mark Bell, we will have an article up on our blog about the upcoming features for our 2020 release. I assume Fred's probably going to send out some bullet points out of that. I don't think he'll send out the full email list, but he'll definitely include a link to the release notes for our upcoming version.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Pavel, do you have anything you want to add before I close out the session?
Basically, just one more thing about that OpenSIPS substitution of old SERP. So just to clarify and not to make some assumptions that it would be a sort of upgrade, it's just a small maintenance that would take like a few minutes of partial downtime and won't really require any packages replacement or database update. This is just some switch that we have to do in your off-peak hours. Fred?
Thank you, Pavel. Thank you. So there you have it. We've gone through some of the features. We've gone through the migration away from towards OpenSIPS, and we've shared with you some of the information on some of the more critical functionality that we've got coming up in Sippy 2020. One thing that we didn't touch on is the fact that we are actually moving our naming convention from the numbering system to a year system. So that's why Sippy 2020 is actually going to be Sippy 2020 and not Sippy 5.3. We've got some very interesting coming up, some very interesting features and functionality coming up in Sippy 2021, 2022, which at this point I'm calling the future of the Softswitch. So be on the lookout for that. Another thing to remember is that if you want to be taking advantage of the sandbox for testing purposes, you'll want to join our sandbox contest if you haven't already done so. I emailed everyone a link to some forms that you can fill out so that you can be part of the contest. I will be emailing out the quiz that's going to be part of that contest so that you can win a sandbox. And all the information relating to how you can win, how to enter, all of that will be on that, has been on that email. For now, I guess one of the things that we've also covered is the value of the features in the Softswitch relating to server performance, security, moving away from deprecated or older systems such as H323. For now, I guess on behalf of Pavel, Sippy, Philip, and myself, Fred, we thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again very soon. Happy Sippy 2020.